today for this event, and very happy to share with you one of our publications that I believe it's one of those where we put together a lot of the knowledge that is sitting in our department. I will hand over now first for some initial remarks to our global director, Ming Zhang. Please.
Thanks, Dr. Angelica, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who are joining here and online. Thank you very much for joining us. It's my pleasure to open this event on this new handbook for livable and resilient cities. This is about integrating hazard and risk information into urban planning. So cities, as we all know, are very important to shape the future of development, especially in rapid urbanizing countries in Asia and in Africa. Cities where jobs are created and where investment flows in search of opportunities. But increasingly, cities face more risks. A lot has to do with rapid urbanization, with some of the inequalities, but also increasing impact from climate change that really increase the level of hazards in different aspects, especially in terms of flood, heat, etc. So this effort to prevent, to reduce these risks are very important to reduce the exposure of cities to exposure and the vulnerability of cities to these risks. I studied urban planning. I cannot claim as an urban planner anymore, having worked so many years, not directly on urban planning. But when I studied urban planning, I didn't look at too much on the risk side. Usually, you look at where the growth will come, where the jobs are going to be, where the residential planning, infrastructure, etc., should be. But the issue of risks didn't figure prominently in the historical, traditional sort of urban planning literature. Of course, I think this has been changing rapidly. And it's important to understand also that this whole idea of resilience is much more than protecting lives and the property from these catastrophic events. It's also foundational for creating jobs, attracting investors, and growing the economy. So this whole idea of risk-informed urban planning enables resilience by integrating risk considerations into planning, into regulation, and into investment decisions. This shifts cities from a reactive to a more forward-looking approach that manages existing risks more effectively, avoid the creation of new risks, and it guides growth towards safer and a more resilient pathway. So this is not just a technical issue. It's about how decisions are made across different sectors, across institutions, and over time. It's about aligning land use, infrastructure, finance, and governance so that they can work together. As we understand it, why is the plan itself important? Because urban infrastructure and, more importantly, the private assets that are built in the process, they last a long time. The horizon is not 2 or 5 years. Horizon is much more than 10 years or decades. So that whole planning and incorporate risk into planning, with a longer view is really sort of important. So today's session is going to launch this report, which this handbook, which provides a practical framework to help cities translate hazard and risk information into better planning and development decisions in ways that are actionable and adaptable across different contexts. Today's session is structured to move from framework to practice. Following an overview of the handbook, we will hear from speakers about how the cities in Barranquilla and Singapore are integrating risk-informed planning, infrastructure, and investment decisions. And following that, we will have a panel discussion that will explore what it takes to translate risk information into effective policies and investments across different regions. So this conversation is really about how we can support cities to continue to function as engines of opportunity while becoming safer, more resilient, and more livable in the face of growing uncertainty. So congratulations actually to the team who worked on this handbook and got this published. Anna, Rose, and also others, including John Kerr, who's leading our community of practice on urban planning. Before passing this floor to Anna and Ross, I would like to thank GFDRR, particularly its City Resilience Program, CRP, for making this handbook possible. And this GFDRR funding received support from the Swiss State Secretary for Economic Affairs, SECO, also received funding from the Austrian Federal Ministry of Finance, the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation. And finally, also the funding from the Gates Foundation forms part of the City Resilience Program. So with that, I'll stop here and look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thanks very much, Ming and Angelica. So I'm Ross Eisenberg, urban specialist in the West Africa region of our GPRO practice. I was formerly with the City Resilience Program and supported the development of this handbook. And I have the pleasure today of presenting the first section of the overview presentation, presenting the introduction to the Handbook for Livable and Resilient Cities, integrating hazard and risk information into urban planning. Before going further, I just want to give a major thank you to our colleagues Angela Franco and Selena Catan, who are connected, who really were the drivers and shapers for the whole development of this great product. So thanks very much. And then before diving in further, maybe just two key points I want to make about sort of where we're coming from and thinking about the development of this report, of this product. So first is that in general, over recent years, I think we've seen a fair number of other publications coming out from the World Bank, from the UN, from other organizations that do address in some way or another the relationship between risk and resilience and urban planning and development. So with this project, what we really wanted to do is take it a step further and first of all formalize and really with some really strong frameworks, a lot of what we're already seeing in our operational projects and a lot of what our client countries are really facing and already taking steps to address on their own, and also provide some very practical guidance, which shows up more in the second half of the handbook, that goes hazard by hazard for every type of hazard you might find in an urban context, and sharing details about how to address it from a really very practical planning standpoint. And another sort of place where we're coming from is that within the World Bank and beyond, a lot of the folks connected know that we're primarily, our titles are either urban specialist or DRM specialist, but more and more we have urban folks working on DRM, we have DRM folks working on urban. The sort of lines so-called are getting blurred. And this is, I think we can agree, a very good thing. But we want to be sure that as we work across these domains and work together even better and closer, that we really have a strong and common language to speak about these issues with one another, so that when we start talking to one another and with our clients, we're doing so from a really shared understanding and common framework. So just to start diving in, we'll start out with the overall challenge. This is likely familiar to many of us in the room, where we see rapid and haphazard urbanization happening throughout the vast majority of the world. And some key figures, about 70% of the world's population is anticipated to live in cities by 2050, with 2 billion people projected to live in slums in just about 3.5 years. And currently, $314 billion of annual cost to cities due to weather and other disasters is occurring now, which could rise to $415 billion by 2050. So cities are growing, and as they're growing, they're doing so in somewhat unsafe ways. So risky growth is outpacing safe growth. So what do we mean by risky growth? In one example related to flooding, there's been a World Bank led paper that demonstrated that from 1985 to 2015, over that 31-year period, there was a 122% increase in the settlement extent that is exposed to the highest flood hazard. So what that means is that as cities have grown, as cities have physically expanded their boundaries, they've been expanding into new areas, formerly non-urban, that are at much higher flood risk than areas that are at a lower flood risk. This growth is particularly acute in the upper middle income countries, actually. And in another example, there is a 10 times greater sensitivity to variation in precipitation that leads to rainfall triggered landslide hazard in urban areas compared to rural areas. Are we still connected on the screen?
No, it's not.
No, did we lose the connection?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
It came back.
Okay, there's a sensitive cable here, so we'll try not to move the machine. So, yeah, this is a big risk.
Infrastructure.
We'll have to talk to the governments here. So, just to illustrate this a bit further, on the flooding example, we see on the right two images of the same area of a city in Angola called Katumbela. It's about, I think, the 15th or so largest city in the country. And you can see these images were taken approximately 20 years apart, how over that period of time, the city has expanded its boundary from the periphery on the top into this new area and become much more populated and dense there. However, this area is not any regular barren or unpopulated area. It's actually a dry riverbed, and it doesn't stay dry all year round. It rains, and when it rains, it floods, and when it floods, it flash floods. And this flash flooding in Katumbela and elsewhere causes significant damage to the assets and infrastructure and services that have been built by the people that have moved in there. And it also has caused a lot of death as well to those folks living there. So how do we avoid more situations like this in Katumbela? And as we develop and our cities change and grow, we plan them in a way to avoid this kind of this situation. Well, we've started to think about utilizing risk-informed urban planning from a perspective where we structure the report around 4 key pillars of environment, people, infrastructure, and economy. And this is really to sort of shape and frame our thinking that enables us to drill a bit deeper. So for each one of these pillars, we set out 4 overarching goals: green urban growth for environment, social inclusion for people, resilient built environment, infrastructure, and shared prosperity for economy. And each one of these, of course, relates and connects and interweaves with one another. So we recognize, we show on the slide, several overlapping ambitions. So for example, clean air and clean water that connect to both environment and people, etc. And we started out the presentation by showing how, as we're familiar with and how we tend to think about, urbanization is commonly thought of as a driver of increased risk. This is what we're seeing around the world. But what we really are aiming to do with this publication is present and demonstrate how we can really think about urbanization with a paradigm shift to not being only a driver of risk, but actually, on the other hand, as a driver of greater capacity and as a catalyst for greater resilience, if done so with better and more informed and better urban planning and more risk-informed urban planning. So just to drive this point home before we get into more of the details, this is the classic disaster risk management framework that we see, where risk is composed of the components of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, where we know that commonly, or by default, urbanization oftentimes increases hazard through phenomena like increased impervious surfaces and the degradation of natural protective barriers. Urbanization increases exposure by incorporating more people and assets in a much more concentrated way into unplanned and risky areas. Urbanization also enhances and increases vulnerability, oftentimes through through poor planning and poor infrastructure development and operations and maintenance, when it concentrates greater poverty and inequality, and there's overburdened infrastructure systems. But what we're aiming to do with this handbook is demonstrate how urbanization can actually drive resilience and be a force for enhancing our urban and built environments, and promote inclusive development, promote urban jobs and labor markets, and also strengthen local governance and institutions. So for more detail on how that works, I'll pass it over to Anna.
Thank you very much, Ross. So let me walk you through how this operational process happens. Traditionally, risk-informed planning is an interactive process that starts with a project preparation, but one of the big challenges is that in this entry point, we are not starting with identifying the right stakeholders. Normally, the disaster risk management agencies, the hydrometeorological agencies, geophysical agencies responsible of developing the hazard studies are not involved in this process. So one of the first starting points is we need to identify the right stakeholders and also the existing information related with disaster risk management and climate change. During the diagnosis, develop the adequate hazard and risk studies, and also at the right skills to be able to take the type of decisions that we are needing for development. Global data normally is not a good resolution really to take these type of decisions. How we define the vision of creating a resilient cities, and how through the planning formulation we define the different measures that are going to be implemented. So what the handbook is really focusing about is in these type of decisions on how we connect during the formulation phase with the design instruments, implementation, and the monitoring and evaluation process. The handbook provides a practical decision framework. It's based on 3 basic actionable long-haul decisions: restrict, condition, and promote. Restrict new development in areas where high level of hazard exists or high levels of risk, and where that risk cannot be mitigated through investments or infrastructure decisions that can manage to acceptable levels of risk. In these areas, probably if they are occupied, you will need to implement the settlement process. And if the areas risk sensitive or environmentally sensitive areas, they need to be declared as a protected ecosystems. Condition measures established when you don't have enough information, for example, restrictions for development until you develop the correct studies to the right level of to take the decisions, or condition the developments to the development of risk reduction measures up to the levels of acceptable risk. So in that sense, you identify the types of use, the construction practices, the exposure and risk reduction measures that are needed to be able to implement the development measures and the different type of uses that are needed or that are proposed for the different areas. And promote in safer areas where hazard and risk are low. Promote infrastructure development from the public sector, for example, to increase and to try to promote the private sector development in the safer areas. Combine these with nature-based solutions, with emergency preparedness and response actions. So the decisions are taken based on the hazard levels and the risk studies, and should be complemented with different planification tools, zoning regulations, development controls, building regulations, corrective measures, financial incentives and disincentives, and land-based financing. So the critical concept to define these different restrict condition and promote measures is the definition of the acceptable levels of risk. So the acceptable risk is how much risk a society tolerates, and is shaped by technical concepts, but also by social, economical, political, and environmental factors. And let me put an example. In cities where you don't have a lot of areas for expansion, and for example, are developed in very steep areas, your acceptance and your tolerance to develop in high slope areas will be lower. So you will need to promote more risk reduction measures to be able to promote your development. Also, one important aspect in this concept is that risk is a dynamic factor. In an area that was not urbanized, that had a very clear floodplain area, you can promote the development very easy. But as urbanization happens, the dynamic and the permeability and the conditions change. So those risk studies have to be updated with certain frequency, and the recommendations should be updated accordingly. But this is the critical element that should be taken to define the different aspects. How this framework works and how we have highlighted in the handbook. Basically, when taking the decisions during the formulation of the plan, the first step is to assess if you have sufficient information based on the hazard and risk studies. If the information is not available, condition development to the development of those, to the information that is needed to take the different risk reduction plans. When hazard and risk information is available based on the levels of the hazard and risk, you define what type of risk reduction measures are needed to be taken and how that combines with the different regulations based on densities and different type of uses. As mentioned before, this is an integrated process that combines different instruments, the regulatory instruments like zoning, land use regulation, graduated planning, building codes, with financial land management instruments that share the economic cost and the benefits of urban transformation between the public and the private sector through land value capture, transfer development rights, or green financing instruments or disaster risk financing insurance. This is complemented with compliance incentives like reduction of construction permits, processing, timing, fees, and with capacity building to generate the awareness, but also to generate the capacity to develop the technical studies and the risk reduction plans that are needed. So let me showcase this implementation with an example of the city of Bogota. Bogota is the capital of Colombia, a city of 9 million inhabitants. By law, in the territorial development plan in Colombia, disaster risk management is a mandatory activity. So in that sense, this has been evolving since 1997. It was a very hard process and a learning curve. It was not easy at the beginning, but what I'm going to show you is a little bit of 20 years of evolution of the concepts of the implementation of this law. So as I mentioned before, during the diagnostic, the city conducted the risk and hazard studies, risk studies in the built and already occupied areas, and hazard studies for the future development and areas of expansion. Based on those studies, during the formulation, non-structural measures related with land use regulation, density, type of uses are taken, but also the prioritization of the different detailed studies that are needed. And this is accompanied with a program of investments for disaster risk management in the short, medium, and long term. During the implementation process, those detailed studies are implemented, the specific structural measures, but also the monitoring and evaluation of those programs, and the enforcement of those regulatory measures from the urban development perspective, the urban control development perspective. This responsibility is shared among different stakeholders. So the city started with the official maps, which are included in the territorial development map, but also in the territorial development law, but it's shared with the developers. When a new urban development is proposed, they need to conduct the mandatory risk assessments according to the technical recommendations of the Institute of Disaster Risk Management in Bogota. The results from the studies, the risk reduction measures, are reviewed by that institute, and if they compliance with the terms of reference, depending on the results of the risk studies, if risk is demonstrated that can be lowered, the developer is allowed to continue with the license processing and with the implementation of the risk reduction measures. Sustainable urban drainage systems are mandatory to lower, for example, the pressure on the stormwater system. So it is also a shared responsibility between the city and the developers, while the public agencies are responsible of the development of the main infrastructure and implement the main mitigation measures. Bogota is a very large city. It's divided in 20 localities or 20 sub-municipalities or localities. They are called localities. So the minor localities are responsible also to develop more detailed studies for the smaller rivers and creeks, for example, and based on those studies, define the different types of measures and implement the risk reduction measures, implement the development control processes, and complement this with all type of nature-based solutions, early warning systems, and the different risk reduction activities. One important aspect that makes this possible is that the city of Bogota has decided that 0.5% of the annual budget should be allocated for risk reduction. So in that sense, these progressive studies and these progressive risk reduction measures are able to be planned ahead and implemented because it doesn't depend of the current measure or the political will to develop these activities. It's a progressive element that has been enabled by a law that is establishing a mandatory budget. So in that sense, risk-sensitive land use planning is not an easy process. It requires strong governance, technical capacity, and financial and long-term sustainability. But we hope that the handbook will provide some examples on how to manage this for different hazards and help us scale up to resilient, sustainable solutions in the urban context. And in that sense, connect people with opportunities for jobs, promote private sector development, and promote long-term economic development for our cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Every time Anna speaks, everything makes sense. No? But we know that in many of the client countries or the places we work, we're far from getting a law like the Colombian law that provides funding and mandate to do this. We have the privilege of having today two speakers that will share with us how this is being done in real cities with real population, with real legal systems that sometimes help or maybe not so much to do this. No, let me introduce our first speaker. I hope I am pronouncing this correctly. Leonard Keokpo. He's a director for APAC at Henning Larsen. He joined the firm in 2008 and co-led the establishment of the Singapore office. He became a partner in 2016. His work focuses mostly on landscape-based, water-sensitive urban design that integrates flood resilience, exactly what we've been discussing, public space and sustainability into planning. In 2023, he received Singapore's President Design Award, Designer of the Year, which is the country's highest honor. So congratulations. It's the highest honor across all design disciplines. So Leonard, over to you to share your insights from Singapore and the work that you've done, where blue-green infrastructure is we're trying to make this an integral part of resilient cities. Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. It's an honor to be here to present in front of this learned crowd. Do you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. I just want to give a short introduction about Henning Larsen. We are a Danish design consultancy that offers architecture, landscape, and urbanism. I myself is based in Singapore. Today, my topic is about making green and blue infrastructure an integral part of resilient cities. Before I do that, I'd like to congratulate the World Bank on the introduction of this handbook. It is much needed everywhere, right? And from my examination, it is very well written. So congratulations. I'm going to start by talking about the obvious, which is the fact that there is clearly a trend in climate change. We are seeing in Southeast Asia at least a significant change in the weather events. We are having much stronger storm events where there's the original green infrastructure was suited for the rainfall, now is overwhelmed. So there's a need for a mindset shift from an engineering-only based design to one that includes the combination of engineering and nature-based solutions. And if you see from this diagram, it will show you that we have to embrace our whole physical environment as potential for stormwater management. And this includes managing from source, pathways, and receptors. The old strategy is we try to get rid of water as soon as possible, and when it reaches downstream, it overwhelms the existing system. But the entire urban spaces are actually potential for solutions, including remediating how we control stormwaters on site. So the diagram on the left is a diagram that shows the peak flows in an urban environment. So the extreme peak is because of the hard surfaces found in modern cities. The lower peak is where you will find stormwater flow in green fields. So what we need to do is we need to shave the peak so that water stays in the ground for longer and do not overwhelm drainage systems. And that includes the use of a variety of solutions. And these tools will allow you to control the quality of the water, but also the quantity of the water. And it is only successful if you can create a treatment train to both improve the water quality and remediate flood. But in order for this to happen, you need an all-of-society approach to solve this problem. In this case, I will cite the example of Singapore, where there's a multi-agency effort at first off managing the stormwater in a catchment. That is the purview of our water agency called PUB. And they will manage all the stormwater that falls within a catchment, how they move through the system, and where they are managed and stored. And then they also have to, they're in charge of taking care of the storm surges that come in from the sea. The sea level rise with a more high intensity in storms are what causes the intense flooding we see in many cities these days. And then there's our master planning agency called the URA. They are the one who would then plan around the drainage plans imposed by the Public Utilities Board. They will have the master plan that controls our 20-year horizon of planning. And then after that, at the next scale is the development guide plans that will be imposed on private developers. Then contributing to all this planning is the quasi-government agencies and the private developers who would then take all these guidelines and realize it within these development plans. With this, all of society at large scale implementation, only then can you actually address the issue of flood risk. So I'm going to show you an example of a project we are now doing for a city in Malaysia. This city is in Cebu. It is very low level, lying near the river delta. You can see that it's next to a river. And due to climate change, it floods a few times a year, serious flooding that is impacting the economic viability of the city, but it's also causing a drain in the population. People are moving out because of climate risk. The problem is compounded because it's built over peat soil. The soil is soft and is full of and is saturated with water and is next to a major river. So how do we come up with a development that can deal with the risk inherent in such a vulnerable environment? The first thing we need to do is engage with all the valid stakeholders, the people who are there, the people who are most impacted by this vulnerability. We talk to the villagers, we talk to the government officials and the town officials, and then we gathered a list of a wish list from them, so that we can keep that as top of mind, because they are the ones who would actually benefit or suffer from any decisions made. It is also important that during the engagement process that they are made fully aware of the cost, risk, and value, and how we balance these different sectors. In an ideal world, you have unlimited budget, you can build whatever you want. But we live in a real world. We live with limited budget. So what do we do with this money? How do we reduce the most intractable risk to extract the best value? So after taking all this feedback, and then we consider the flood risk. We did a flood risk mapping of the entire town, and this is mapped over different time horizons. That means flood risk based on climate change projected in 2050, in 2075, in 2100, and over different storm intensities, just to see which part of the city will be impacted the most. And then we came up with some zoning hierarchies that's informed based on this flood risk mapping. So the areas that is most at risk are the ones with the lowest level of development, the highest level of risk. Those with the lowest level of risk are the ones who have incremental layers of development, and with the ones with the lowest, the most dense. And then we have risk remediation. In this case, we are creating pathways for storm flows. So in this environment, in this new urban fabric, where can the water move so that people are not too overly impacted by climate change? We create visualization to help the public understand what they will be getting. So in this case, you do not have to sacrifice your livability in order to be able to live with water. In fact, we are visualizing a new typology where people can live with the environment in harmony, where animals can roam freely and have protected zones, and people can still have recreational areas. We also important to collect to understand the development potential, because we cannot dedicate all land just for flooding. We have to provide spaces for the city to grow and to prosper. And this is a density map showing the different levels of development. And this is the overall master plan framework at the end of this exercise, where we actually list out where they can develop, where they cannot develop, where they can have higher levels of development. What is the relationship between this development and the nature areas and the flooded areas? And what is the relationship with the existing city fabric? And finally, this is a visualization of how this new city can look. A city where human can coexist with nature, where the climate change did not disrupt the daily lives, where there's a space for nature and a space for water to coexist. There's one stage that a lot of people forget. It doesn't end with the planning. Staging is a large part of the success of every project. How do we stage projects for success? Like most sites, there are actually people living there. So how do we make sure that their interests are taken care of? The next is, where do we plan the blue and green infrastructure within this fabric? And then how do we attract private and public investments in order to fund this infrastructure? So this is just a diagram of how we are looking at the people who are living there, the existing villages, how many people are impacted, and where we can relocate them so that they're not too far from where they are living currently. And then this is one scenario where we can stage this development proposal over 30 years. This is the staging diagram of how these different parts will grow through the process. And then finally, there's an important part is, how do we work with the private sectors for them to get a buy-in and be co-developers in our development? And then this is the phasing diagram over the period, allowing the development to grow gradually and organically, right? With this development framework as a guide, a broad guide that will lead them into the future. We have got an example where we did many years ago in Ørsted, Denmark, where we were appointed as a consultant to plan this plot of land. And this was a really low level swamp land. It was valued at $5 per square meter. At the end of the planning, it could be sold for 1,000 square meters, right? And yet provide affordable housing at the fringe of Copenhagen. So it is a really good example of a win-win situation where you take the challenge of climate change and turn it into an advantage that will benefit both the public and the private sector. I'd like to end with a postcard from the future, where the traditional can live with the modern, the built can live with nature, and man can coexist in harmony with an environment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Leonard. This is it's wonderful and it's very inspiring, I think. Very interesting to see how the process unfolds. I have lots of takeaways I wrote, but in the interest of time, I'm going to invite our second speaker to come in and share the experience from Colombia. So our next speaker is Ricardo Vives Guerra. He's an architect and urban strategist with over 15 years of experience, leading large-scale urban transformation projects in Latin America. He has worked across public and private sectors, serving as the president of Puerta de Oro, which is the economic development company and advisor to the city of Barranquilla that has done a tremendous transformation in recent years. So Ricardo will reflect on Barranquilla's experience and also show how risk-informed urban planning, combined with some of the elements that Leonard also already shared with land value capture, and can help to finance flood resilience, while at the same time bringing the best of what urbanization can provide in terms of jobs and private sector opportunities. Thank you so much. Ricardo, over to you.
Hello, thank you. Good morning for me, everybody. I guess it's morning also in Washington, just a bit of a delay. I'm so happy to be here and be sharing the experience with you guys. Again, I'll add myself to Leonard's congratulations to the handbook and the way it's written and how useful a tool it is. So I'm just happy to share some of the work that we've been doing here in Barranquilla and across Latin America, and hope that it's of service. Can you please let me know if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
It's not full screen.
It's not on full presentation mode. So I don't know if it's because of PDF or
yeah.
No, yes, now it is.
Okay, perfect. So let me just start by sharing. I was born and raised in Barranquilla. This is the city where I grew up. It's nice. It's tropical. It's Caribbean. But it looks kind of gray and it looks kind of dull in a way. And this is what people had in mind when we thought of Barranquilla. But in truth, Barranquilla has another side, which is way over there in the back, a neglected side, which is the Magdalena River, the most important river waterway in Colombia. And we just weren't recognizing the presence of this magnificent landscape that we were granted. Barranquilla is a coastal city. It's a Caribbean city. And the reason that Barranquilla is now 2.2 million inhabitants is because of its location on the Magdalena River Delta. It's summer all year long, but we do have two waterfronts. We have the Caribbean Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, and we have the Magdalena River. And this is where we are at, where we were a few years ago. It's a compact city. It's got some urban sprawl. We'll see that in a bit. But the main concept in this image that I wanted to share is that the waterways and the location and the landscape were completely neglected for many years. Just sort of context and what was mentioned in this introduction, just before 2008, Barranquilla was a city in despair and poverty. 43% of the population was considered poor. The national poor poverty rate was around 25%. 67% of the schools were under the performance indicators. 60,000 kids out of school system. 10% of park satisfaction. 60% of people lived more than 1.6 kilometers away from healthcare center. It was the only city with rivers running down its roads. It's called arroyos. It's stormwater surge in the streets, and was a city indebted over 204%, and tons of waste of solid waste in the streets. And then in 2008, there's a switch. There's a new political project that comes into power, and a lot of things started to change, starting with the very basics things like paving roads and refurbishing healthcare facilities and school infrastructure, installing the first BRT system, and then a little bit more sophisticated things for our context, which is LED lighting system in the streets, and then the public tree nursery, which then enabled for a landscaping agency to be born, and then the whole city started to become a lot more greener, and also just jumping into a big events like the Central American Games in 2018. And then I want to highlight three of the projects that happened during this time, which is the Art Part system, which is the World Ross Prize for Cities winner, and just because it's a fantastic project with the citywide same quality of urban furniture for the parks, but also because they're co-created with the communities. Every community participates in their design, and also there's always a park ranger, which is a person of the community that's designated to upkeep and the maintenance of the park. So it's a really beautiful project that changed the identity of the city. And then our lifelong brand or negative brand, which was our arroyos or stormwater which basically was never an engineering problem. There was even a famous minister in Colombia that said this, the only solution to our problem of stormwater surges was moving the city. But in reality, it was never a problem of engineering. The engineering was there. There's more or less to 70 kilometers of waterways that have been solved. The problem was the financial problem. And in the end, after building trust in the city and people starting to pay more taxes, we were able to do like a forward or a kind of a TIF, but not under the TIF umbrella finance mechanism, which in the end allowed the solution for our lifelong tragedy of surge water that killed people. And then finally, this, which is our convention center and our expo center, for two reasons. The first one is because it helped jumpstart a whole part of the industry and economy in the city that we didn't have before, which is the events and tourism. So a lot more tourists started to come into the city because we had a really nice convention center. But the second is that if you can see carefully in the back of the image, you see the Magdalena River. So this was the first project which actually opened up a window to a river. And this is something that I want to talk more about in a few seconds. But then as the city started to change and all these projects started to build, the city starts to grow financially, economically, and also starts to grow in population. And this brings new challenges up until 2019 unknown for us. But basically, we're talking about new roads and new logistics infrastructure getting built. And land is always owned by somebody. Somebody has an opportunity for economic growth, and then sooner than later this happens, and this is definitely something we want to avoid. And this is basically what was happening in Barranquilla. Over the first 200 years of existence of the city, there was more land consumed in the last 20 years, 10 to 20 years, and in the first 180 years, the city was born. And in a study that we did with the Marin Institute of Urban Management in NYU, the projections are that by 2050, our metropolitan area is going to grow to 2.9 million. So it's over 700,000 people coming or living in Barranquilla, and that's going to be a massive problem if it's not tackled correctly. And this is where our waterfront gets like a stage front position. Barranquilla has always been a city of water, by water, for water. It was a port city right after the Industrial Revolution with steamboats coming up the river. Barranquilla starts to spur. And you can see in the image that this is one of the first maps of the city. The river is there and our city is basically there because of the river. But after containerization of the industry, of the shipping industry in the 80s, as it happened all over the world, our part of our riverbank was neglected and no longer was useful and no longer was needed for industries to set themselves right next to a river. So we ended up in 2019 with a gem that we didn't realize we had, which is 280 hectares of land, central land, serviced land with transportation, water systems, electricity, electrical works. And there's a whole lot of potential of rebuilding, which was basically unused. In 2015, this was a strip of land which basically didn't exist in the top of our minds. And a few industries that were dying out, but mostly brownfields and greenfields of old industrial or basically unused land. So this part of the city, nestled between the Magdalena River and the Via 40, which is a main logistics road, is an incredible opportunity to counter sprawl, but also to create a new and better part of the city for the 700,000 people that are coming. So we did a master plan, and this is basically more or less what should be happening there. And turning this part of the city into this, which is basically a walkable, livable, 15-minute city, or part of the city that should happen in the riverbank. So what has happened in the recent years, this whole process of turning our face again to the river started in the 80s. Japan was already working on their waterfront, so an expert mission comes to Colombia and to Barranquilla in the 80s, and they say, listen, you guys are looking the wrong way. You should be looking back to the river. We weren't ready yet. But in the year 2000, with the first land use and zoning policy for the city, the first regulations and the first rules for how to develop a city were set. This was a major component, not only in Barranquilla, but also in Colombia. And then in 2009, the second land use and zoning policy comes out. And this is where the foundations for the recovery of public space were set. And the first long-term vision for the city was actually built. Because of the success of the city and what was happening in the city, by 2014, 5 years later, the land use and zoning policy had to be revised. And this is a major milestone because this is where the city starts dreaming and putting into paper what it would actually want to become. And this is the first time that we see the river in the central stage. And then from there on, projects that we just mentioned, like the convention center and the Malecón, which is the river walk we're going to see in a bit. And then the master plan. And what finally happens only very recently is that real estate developments that start to spur, with the first housing units being built as we speak. So what is the Grand Malecón, and how does this whole city by the river start? There was 6 challenges basically. We're going to go quickly and focus just on a bit of those. But basically, the riverbank was disconnected and forgotten. It was private land. There were a couple of vulnerable neighbors to the project where it wanted to be built. It was a flood-prone area, and it's a very long time execution time for the project. And it's actually a huge bet with very uncertain returns. So how to bring this part of the city to the top of mind? We had to somehow connect the riverbank to the city, and also not only connect it, but make it interesting and attract people. So this is what we were talking about, of the city just basically neglecting this part of land. And after the Malecón, which is basically a park, a boardwalk, but more than a boardwalk, a park and a road, you open up the city and you give it a new part of a new front, a new face to show. The second one, which is very important, and it was basically one of the highlights of the project, is that the land was privately owned, and we had to secure the land without dispersing the budget that we had for the project, or spending the budget that we had in the project, just buying land, which is a huge problem for most of our cities in the developing world. So we had to do a lot of artistry in creating laws and backing national laws, in which basically a land forward, it's land transfers that are done in exchange for the development rights, but they're done in advance, which was kind of like the novelty here. And that was only possible because of the trust that the city and the government had created in landowners, that they actually were able to believe and see that if they gave the land in advance, a beautiful park was going to be built, and then their land would be more valuable for real estate development. And this is what happened. It actually happened. Now their front, the riverfront, is with a beautiful park and a road and a connecting road. Then we did a lot of work with the communities. The two neighboring communities are part of the Malecón. They're part of the staff. They're part of the tour guides. They're part of the cleaning staff, the maintenance staff. And this really helped for them to be engaged in ownership of the city. And it's not a project. It is a project for the entire city, but it's also a project that benefits both of these communities. This one that is also, and I love to talk about this because it's unperceived. People see a park, they see a boardway, they see a river walk, but it's actually a lot more than that. It's resilience infrastructure in the end. This is what we had in the riverfront. And basically the entire 280 hectares of land were a flood-prone area that will easily suffer under the new climate change conditions. So we had to build a heavy confinement infrastructure with the proper drainage system that comes through. In the end, the debate on how to do softer or harder or more engineering solutions, it all depended on counterbalancing. If we did very soft solutions, we wouldn't fit too many people in this part of land, and most of the 280 hectares of land would have gone into greenery, and which was a really great solution. But in a balancing act, we had to opt for a harder solution that would give space for more of the 200 hectares of land to be used for people, and then stopping or counterbalancing urban sprawl. So this is what we ended up with, a new front of the city right on the riverwalk. And just to create a sense of closeness to the river, there was a floodable areas in part of the design that we did. This is one of the floodable areas that allows people to change from this balcony type relationship with the river to this more intimate, almost I can touch the river relationship. We split the project into 5 functional units. Basically, this is to reduce the expectation of people. So basically, every year, a new part of the Malecón was built. It was fractioned into 5 just to ease the people's and the city's expectations and earn their trust that it was actually being built as we speak. And finally, our riverwalk it's only as good as the people that go there. So a whole operations and maintenance infrastructure and budget was set up in long term, just so we could have food vendors, we could have concerts, and we could just have cultural and recreational activity that would keep the infrastructure alive and secure that part of the investment that was done was going to be returned in creating a new postcard for the city, which is basically what is happening. And just a final note on the framework for this project, which is a real challenge that we have in developing countries. There's always the central idea or starting point of what needs to be done. So in this case, we needed to counterbalance urban sprawl. We needed to secure flood-prone area. We needed to create more livable space for the city or the dwellers. So there was an obvious thing that we needed to be done, but it's not always so clear what needs to be done. There's cities that start building stadiums without a need, or they start building massive projects that they really are not needed. Second, you just try to manage and find out what you can do. Sometimes it's engineering, sometimes it's budgeting, it's finance, sometimes it's permitting, sometimes it's laws, and a lot of projects get stuck when this interaction doesn't fit. And you know what you need to do, but you can't do it right now, or you can't do it at all. Also, you take into account what citizens want, and citizens in Barranquilla were craving public space. Because of the park system project that won the World Rush Prize for Cities, and because of the dense nature of our city, citizens were actually craving parks. This is why the boardwalk or the Malecón is not just a road, it's not just a boardwalk, but it's a huge park. And then finally, you have to take it into account. It's what politics can enable. You can have a beautiful idea that people want, that it's needed, that you have the budget for, and you can do it, and you have the permits, but you have to also have political will, which is something that most technicians, as myself, struggle with. But in the end, it's the way of the game. You have to somehow get the attention of politicians and people in power. And when you get this intersection that it seems almost impossible, that's when reality and dreams come true, and projects like this come true, and you get a new riverfront for a city that really needed it, and you get a new postcard for the city.
Thank you. Thank you, Ricardo. Very interesting. I used to work in Colombia and in Barranquilla when it was still an idea. So it's really wonderful to see this a reality now. Congratulations. We invited 3 of our very seasoned practitioners, World Bank task team leaders, to hear their reflections about what we've been presented today, the handbook, and also the Singapore and the Colombia examples. And we have some, of course, you can comment on whatever you think it's important, but we would, our interest to hear from you is what lessons stand out for you from the examples you've heard today. And how relevant and useful and how we can use this with our client countries in your respective regions. No? So let me introduce I'll be very quickly so that we can maximize the time for the questions and discussions. In no particular order, but I think we have Mega Mukin, who is a lead urban specialist focusing on our right now on Africa East and South. We have Lorenzo Carrera, which is a lead disaster risk management specialist working in Africa West. And we have Qiyun Huang, which is senior urban development specialist based in China, working in the Asia region. So I see Qiyun in the screen, so I will start with you, if that's okay. We'd love to hear your reflections and what you think of the cases, and particularly the usefulness and relevance of that. Over to you, Qiyun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And first of all, congratulations again to the team for launching of the handbook. And thank you for the two speakers for sharing your experiences. I think the two speakers really highlighted well kind of one end of the spectrum of how we are looking at risk-informed spatial planning and rather risk-informed development, actually, in particular in their cases. So maybe where I'm coming from, just want to give a quick plug too. We are actually also completing a study where we examined 4 countries with different contexts, Australia, China, the Philippines, and South Korea, and looking at how they do risk-informed spatial planning. So it is very interesting, I think, from what we have found out so far. There is actually a kind of consistent set of barriers that we have noticed from these studies. I would just highlight a couple of them. First, and which I think is probably the most fundamental, is actually on the governance side and what we call mandates without teeth. So very often what we see is that we might have the risk assessments, but they might be just advisory or some kind of technical document or study. And they cannot actually be used or enforced. And related to that, the other challenge is really that there may be a lot of data, but planners, again, cannot use them. It's either that they are too technical or they are not standardized or not translated into some sort of practical land use related decisions. And thirdly, we also observe a lot of challenge in terms of institutional silos. And I think this is very common in many, many topics, not just risk-informed spatial planning. But, different agencies, they hold different mandates. They may not talk to each other. So this is the horizontal integration. And then in terms of vertical as well, from national to the local level, sometimes how does that translate down to be able to be implemented at the local level? And then lastly, it's just about capacity and resources, which I think many of the speakers and earlier in the handbook explanation, we have also heard. So I just want to start with highlighting some of the barriers that we have observed, but happy to discuss more about potentially what then can be done to address some of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Qiyun. I agree. I think there's so many issues need to be resolved, the different incentives, the different mandates, teams, even scales, to integrate these two things. But to me, I think what the examples show is that if you have a development outcome, it sort of surpasses the risk element or just the planning element. No, it's more economic than just about the risk. Let me move to Lorenzo. I don't see you, but that might just be.
I'm here.
Okay.
Can you see me?
Yes. No, we don't actually.
No.
We hear you, but we don't.
I can see you though, Lorenzo.
Okay.
Can you see me? Yeah.
It's fine. Don't worry. We can hear you very well. Oh, yeah. Now we see you. Thank you.
Okay.
You needed to speak. You were just like God, like a voice. So there's especially in low capacity context, like the countries where you are now working in Africa West. We'd love to hear your reflections on how to use this or how to apply the lessons on the handbook in these contexts.
Yes, thank you very much, and congratulations to the team for the very useful handbook. I think it will be used quite extensively in our engagement. Actually, we are also aiming to translate it to French, since I'm working in Francophone countries, and disseminate here. I'm based in Dakar. And I wanted to say a couple of words first on the experience that we heard from Barranquilla and Singapore, and it relates to where I work in mostly low capacity context. What is revealing is that risk informed planning it works when it stops to become a technical exercise and it becomes a long-term community and political commitment. And I think the handbook addresses this by proposing what can be done in practical terms, what has been done. There are very useful examples. And as you mentioned before, the social and economic return of this approach is very important. So connecting, yes, planning, risk to economic growth, livability, and more productive cities is very important. So in low capacity context, probably the big risk is to wait for the perfect conditions before starting. So we saw in Barranquilla, I think the last slide was very very clear that there is a window of opportunity. There is this small corner that we have to take, and cities have to take to make things happen. We know that in West Africa, in Senegal particularly, there is very fragmented data, overlapping mandates across different institutions. Master plans are not updated or not enforced, and very limited financial and technical capacity in the municipality. So resolving all of this is very challenging all at the same time. So taking the windows of opportunity and advancing in very practical step as proposed by the handbook is the way to go. I can bring examples. I don't know how much time we have. Can I bring one example?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So in Senegal, we have a project. It's called Stormwater and Climate Change Adaptation Project in the peri-urban areas of Dakar. It started because of the 2009 floods. We did a PDNA assessing the $100 million damage, mostly in peri-urban areas. So identified the problem. The problem was there, but it was identified, evident. And the World Bank started an engagement that is lasting more than 20 years now. So we took that window of opportunity, that community commitment, political commitment, and through our support, so an investment, we engaged and created this opportunity. So the result is that we constructed hundreds of kilometers of drainage. We protected hundreds of thousands of people, and we are also working. We produced the drainage master plan. We are developing urban development master plans. And we are working on the sustainability, the financial sustainability of the drainage system. Moreover, what is very important is to take the national policy window opportunity. So within this engagement, the new urban code and construction code was approved, and this embeds disaster risk management and flood risk management into urban planning. And now the municipalities are developing this urban planning, embedding risk management, particularly flooding. So the other point is that of taking these windows of opportunity is to act where the risk is more visible. African cities are expanding very fast. they're doubling every 20, 25 years. So the needs are immense. So what is very important, and we saw here in Senegal, is to act where the risk is more visible. In Saint Louis, UNESCO heritage site in the north of Senegal, is a very important city for Senegal, both in cultural and economic terms. Thousands of people were affected by storms in 2017, 2018. And so there was this opportunity for the government, for this municipality to address not only the relocation of people that were affected by storms, that lost their houses, there were 200 people, but also to rethink the waterfront of the city. And that's what we are doing with the Saint Louis Resilience Project. So I think this is a very good example of what the Handbook framework proposed. So restrict the high risk coastal band and rehabilitate the area, promote safe relocation, and build the planning instrument for long-term resilience, because we are also doing the drainage master, supporting the drainage master plan, the urban master plans for the city, etc. So let me stop here.
Thank you.
I wanted to present a couple of examples. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Very good to see that the framework, the approach, you find it practical and useful in your context. Let me move to Mega. We can't see you yet, but I hope we can see you soon.
She's on the way, so she cannot open the camera.
So, but
Sadly, you won't see me. You won't see me at all. I'm so sorry, Angelica. I'm in traffic in Delhi between stops. But I hear you and I see you. You all look lovely on the screen.
Okay. And for those who don't know Mega, Mega and I, people used to confuse me with Mega on the street. They would stop me and think it's Mega. So maybe, I think we look alike, so it's okay. Like I can represent Mega visually and she can speak through the traffic in Delhi. Please go ahead, Mega.
I'm laughing because I think that's much better. Maybe I should just use that on a regular basis. Thanks, Angelica. No, thank you for having me. I'm glad the team could fit me in, even at the last minute. Ming, you started with a confession at the outset, and I'm going to follow in your footsteps. When I first joined the GP, I thought DRM was domestic resource mobilization. So I've also learned along the way. But I think one of the lessons I took was that it's actually the same, right? You have to make information somehow bite through the rules and the budgets. And from what I've seen, we've spent years and considerable amount of money producing risk maps and done hazard assessments and also handbooks in the past. And yet, not just in Africa, but also in Europe and Central Asia, I come across cities that keep building in high-risk areas, including in floodplains. And so either everyone in City Hall is immensely irrational, or the problem isn't the data, or it isn't just the data, and it's the incentives. And I think this is the fundamental challenge that this handbook is trying to solve for. And so 3 things that I would look out for, and I think the GFDRR and the global units already do this extremely well. So first is to make that risk data that is out there at a level that is decision grade, right? That users can actually put to use. And Chiyun already talked about it very eloquently, and I won't repeat her points, which I fully support. The second thing would be to pair the data with some kind of muscle. And I really liked Leonard's example of the master plans built around the drainage plans. How cool is that, to try and build enforcement and maintenance into the mandate, and then, to tie the risk criteria to the budgets going forward. And then the third, echoing what Ricardo was saying, which was a great point, which was to try and aim where politics lives, whether it lives in jobs objectives or services objectives. If you can show that a resilient investment also improves access to work, it shortens commutes, or it makes water and power much more reliable, then presumably mayors will back it and citizens will defend it. So if it would be possible for design for these co-benefits from the very outset, would make all our lives easier, including within the institution. I stop there and turn back to you in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Mega. Very, very well put. I agree with you. I'm not even a planner, huh? So to me, I came even from way, even more far behind. So let me open it up to questions and comments from the audience or anybody that wants to share something. We wanted to leave some time for that. So hopefully we can take advantage of it. I don't know who's controlling that.
Can you see who is raising hand? Just open your mics and make the question directly. Yeah.
But you need to come so they won't hear you otherwise. And if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, Cécile Andonoriou, GRM specialist working in West Africa. And maybe, sorry, Lorenzo, I'll put you a little bit on the spot, but we see with those example that we heard about, that there's always some sort of jewel hidden, you know, like there's a land that was some sort of not taken care of. There's a law that is at some point accepted and then really boost the thing. And what we always see, also see that it's a recipe. You need to have all the ingredients. You cannot make a cake with just eggs. In West Africa, we often have one or two ingredients. For example, in the example that Lorenzo gave, the project 2, which I know well, we really are good at doing great infrastructures, and we're trying hard to do, you know, also green, but it's the population and in the city is so dense that it's really difficult to have a third and a fourth ingredient, so we could have a beautiful waterfront, etc. So I was just wondering if in those contexts, and I'm speaking for more difficult contexts where the opportunity is not there anymore, because somehow we missed the window, you know, the fantastic window where, like in New York, or you have a land and you don't know what to do, and you work with the private sector and they see their interests, etc. Where do we start? Do we really, is it okay to only do gray for many, many years and try to build the trust that we talked about and the love? I'm just wondering, yeah, what is the magical ingredient that we can add?
Very good question.
Yeah, I will invite our presenters or our panelists to weigh in on this one, because I don't have the answer. So.
I'll jump in. There's no recipe in the end. I think there's just good practices and there's good examples, and there's, in the end, every city is its own creation, and there's things that I think the worst thing that you can try to do is apply a recipe. It's actually, I believe it's the opposite. When you try to emulate good examples just because they're good examples, in the end, I think those massively fail, and you could do a whole yearbook of things not well executed. But there are good practices that you need to try and adapt. And humbly in Barranquilla, we were very open in trying not to invent the wheel and just trying to learn from people that had done it good or great and actually trying to make it work for us. In Latin America, it's always very difficult because there's always, and I imagine the African context is similar or worse, but it's always a money issue. There's always a trust issue. There's always a governance issue. There's always you see examples from Copenhagen and from New York, and you see them so far away that you think it's never going to be able. And that's where the framework that we proposed is actually very useful, because in the end, it's all about starting. And if we would have wanted to have the huge budget that enabled us to do a sponge city with all the technology, but we didn't, and we did the best we could. So in the end, as I tried to explain in my example, the ideal solution maybe would have been textbook, like trying to talk about recipes. The ideal solution that checks all the boxes and all the literature maybe would have been a different one. But the ideal solution for us was to go with a gray hard infrastructure, just because it enabled us to opt for the lesser of two evils. We would have had a beautiful park that maybe nobody used, and still we would have the urban sprawl challenge. So I don't know. I guess I would stay away from recipes and just trying to improvise your own recipe using the infrastructure. And for example, the handbook has a lot of great examples and things that you need to do and how to get crafty to solve the financing issue, or how to get interesting in examples on how to get behind public trust. There's a lot of literature there. But I guess in experience, I wouldn't try to reply any recipe. There's no magical recipe. I hope there is. If someone has it, then just pitch it out for us.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think Leonard has his hand up.
Sure. I think that's a really good question, because a lot of cities in the world are confronted by this question. There are a lot of built cities that has got no room to accommodate new stormwater strategies. Not the way we think about it. So there's one project that we did where we look at the existing city, and obviously there were very little spaces to accommodate water. What we did was we did a series of risk assessment for the different parts of the city, trying to quantify which are the critical infrastructure and services that needs to be protected, right? Down the scale to those that's maybe marginal. And then we came up with a list of priorities and solutions that is in line with these priorities. So, for example, a road that leads to a hospital, that must be flood-free all the time. But another road, a quiet road where there's a lower density, we allowed it to flood periodically during a storm event, but controlled flooding. And then through this kind of prioritization and targeted solutions, I think at the end of the day, you might not come out with an ideal situation, but you come out with a set of compromise that will benefit the majority, right, while minimizing the inconvenience to a smaller minority. So that's one way we have done it. As I said, it's not ideal, but in an existing city with a built urban fabric, that might be one solution.
Thank you, Leonard.
Maybe I can add just one thing. No, I agree. In some of the very dense cities where there's no green space, you have to do the hard infrastructure. I remember visiting Tokyo. They had this huge sort of underground sort of storage facilities. No, really just a full flood sort of management. So it's if you don't have the nature, you have to do the human sort of concrete thing very big. But the one thing, especially in Africa context, I think the thing is we focus on the expansion area. Like the urban area is going to the built up area is going to double in the next 30 years. So most of the population, the new urban population, the new building actually in the expansion area, where you have a lot of opportunities. So and the way is the problem is like we built the expansion the way we built the current sort of cities. So there you can do a little bit, probably not necessarily too complicated, but create big areas for water retention and things, parks. That I think there's a lot of possibilities that we can probably, even for our engagement with the countries and the cities, we can focus more on, because we always focus on the current cities which are slums and flooded. But you look at where's happening, actually focus more on the expansion area.
I think Anna had.
Yeah, one small point that I wanted to add, because Tanzania, Dar es Salaam case, for example, is one of our flagship projects that is creating a transformational development. I think creating a vision I mean, connecting those technical studies, engineering, economic studies with landscape and a very participatory process that created ownership from the authorities to the communities on the vision of what was the type of development that they wanted, allowed to have that transformational project. I mean, there are many ingredients and there is no recipe, but I think that was one key point that I think it made Dar es Salaam project, that the Missing Basin project, feasible because it got the buy-in from everyone, and now it's becoming a transformational.
There's one question in the chat. Stamatis,
yeah.
Yes, can you open up the mic? Or
I am also in transit on a plane, in fact, so no. Please.
Okay.
If he chatted it, if he put it there, maybe you can read it.
Yes, so beyond the land zoning and restrictions, does the handbook cover experiences of how to use land tenure, incentives, disincentives, or risk-informed planning? For example, not formalizing tenure in hazard areas, providing options for relocation and such.
We mentioned the importance of the topic, but we didn't develop in detail on those topics. We were very focused on how to do the risk studies and connect it to the planning process, but there is a lot of elements of the planning process that are needed to make this happen, but we didn't go into the details of those. So it's not.
Yeah. So
has her hand raised. Should we take this last one?
Yeah.
Actually, I have a quick question. Hi, my name is Aiden. I am an African Fellow from the 2026, and I work with the Disaster and Climate Risk Department. So my question is quickly, like in Ethiopia, like specifically like in Addis Ababa area, there is like a huge informal settlements, and urban growth is happening faster than like a risk-informed planning. So my question is, how can we move from strong frameworks to practical, scalable solutions, especially like for housings, like for affordable and resilient housings in such contexts?
Okay. So, Ricardo, you want to take any on this or?
Yes, but just to make sure that your question is I mean, I'll try to answer. Basically, and I'm sorry, but I'd like to speak on our experience just because it's more comfortable to give examples. But in our case, trying to figure out how to tackle this large scale format projects, it wasn't out of a whim. It wasn't out of just a desire. It was actually after a long process, and cities that are really in despair and cities that are really in trouble. I don't think the solution is, for many reasons, I don't think the solution is trying to come up with this large format and grandiloquent projects. I think cities need to start with simple things, and it's not because of trying to downgrade or anything. It's just about capacity building and trust building, and I don't know the context of many other cities, but I do think that the right way to start is just little bits of like starting out small and just learning your way on, and trying to model through the projects and trying to get in the know of what citizens want. And in that sense, I think working with banks like World Bank and other banks and institutions, financing problem is never going to be an issue at the end. It's all about trust, and trust secures income for the city, and then income for the city means loans and credits. And I mean, in the end, that what I'm going back to my previous answer, that there is no recipe. I do truly believe that there are very good practices, but every city is its own monster, its own or its own complexity that needs to be understood and solutions. And that's why we have a lot of innovation in risk management, because there's always a lot of set of changing priorities, and people tackle them and cities tackle them in different ways. I think that's that. I mean, examples like the handbook, they really work to help you tailor your own solution, but in the end, it has to come starting out small and very, very, very much your own.
Okay, good. I think we have running out of time. Thanks a lot to everyone for joining. Congratulations to the team for this report. The one thing I got from this is really good to have the DRM and urban planners work together. Somehow the bad things, the flood and all the bad things, when you put the nice urban planning and the look at it, it becomes actually very beautiful stuff. That's really important, sort of nice together. This is actually sort of very nice, reported visually. It's very helpful sort of for people to use it. A lot of the graphs and things are very intuitive, easy to absorb. What I would like to challenge the team is now it's out. The success of this handbook will be measured by how many of these things get into the realities, how the projects are being designed and implemented, use these approaches. So that's how the success of this handbook is going to be measured. So I don't think the work has stopped. It's just starting. I think we discussed actually having a lot of there are a lot of good examples. So it should be sort of have some online version, which is a kind of evolving portal that over the time you can add into good examples, sort of more information that can be more practical, sort of for different people to use. And then finally, I think Ricardo mentioned something about the private sector, getting the private developers to come in. And I think these some of the things, how to engage with the private sector would be important to consider. Thanks a lot to everyone for joining, especially thank to the team and thank to our guest speakers for really giving very good examples. All the best. Have a good day and good evening to everyone.
Thanks, everyone. We look forward to continue the partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.